Hello everyone and welcome to section 2 of the Seacoast Wrap Knit Along. So in this one we are going to look at section 2 here. Now remember we started from this corner, we have worked all of section 1, so now we are going to work section 2 where we are increasing on one side and decreasing on the other to stay with the same number of stitches but to force this knitting on the bias. This is still in color A and we are now moving into a 2-row repeat, where the second row is as we've done before, where you keep your 4-stitch garter stitch border and purl all the way across to the other 4-stitch border. So this is my section 1. You can see it is a triangle, a little curly on the end, but that'll come out in blocking. And I have put in a lifeline here. Now this lifeline is more for me to measure because I do want to show you where each section stops within this pattern. And it's going to be easier to do that if I have this line of contrasting yarn through it. If this is your first time knitting it, or if you simply want to put a lifeline in, I would put a lifeline personally after each section. Since at this point I know I have the right number of stitches, I know my stitches are where I need them to be, I know that this is a safe spot that I can rip back to. So what we will do now is work our first row. So we will scrunch it all up. That's just how I knit. We are going to slip this first stitch, and this is our increase side here. So we are going to work our increase stitch with a knit front back. We are going to knit 2 and be done with the increase side of our garter stitch border. We are going to knit another 2 and then purl 2, knit 2 across. And this will keep that same texture pattern while increasing on one side and decreasing on the other. And these 2 rows are the same rows that you will repeat 38 times in total. So I am going to come back once I have finished with this row. Almost. I'm going to stop just a couple stitches before the decrease, and then I'll show you again at that point. Alright, so I am back. I have worked all the way across to these last 4 stitches to work the decrease. So at this point in our border, we are going to knit 1. We are going to knit 2 together to do our final decrease, and we are going to knit the last stitch. That is the first row. So for the wrong side row, we are going to do what we have done consistently so far. We are going to slip the first one. We are going to knit 3, and then we will purl across. Now what this will do is shift the entire shawl over by 1 stitch each row. This is what creates that bias knitting, so that all of our stitches are shifting across the shawl as we're knitting up, so that it looks, when it's done, to have that nice series of diagonal lines in it, rather than having garter strips following along the length of the shawl, if that makes sense. So if I pull my needles out just a little bit here so that the stitches don't fall, and we look again at these edges, we are going to increase always on our right hand garter stitch border on the right side only, and we are always going to decrease 1 stitch on the left side of our garter stitch border on the right side only. And we will continue doing that for 38 times in total. If you wanted to make your shawl longer, here is where you would be adding additional rows if you have extra yarn. You could make it shorter here as well. This would be a great spot to do that length conversion simply because you're not doing any shaping in any significant manner. You are increasing on one side and decreasing on the other, but you're not creating that triangle, right? You're keeping the same width consistently throughout the part of the shawl. So if you want to make it longer, I would do so here. If you want to make it shorter, I would also do that here. This should use up a good chunk of your color A. So here is my color A. You see I still have quite a bit left. I do have a lot of extra yarn in these skeins than I did for the sample, so in all likelihood I will have plenty of this yarn left over. I may include some extra rows. I think I may go to 45 repeats in this case, but you do want to make sure that you have a decent amount left over still, because you still have that color transition in the middle in our next section, section 3, where we start transitioning between color A to color B. So if you do have extra yarn like I do, don't use it all up right here. We still need a decent amount here. But if you do have quite a bit of yarn left, maybe a whole half skein, for example, you could keep going for quite some time. If you do want to know exactly how much you can increase the section by, what I would personally do is weigh your skein or your ball before one repeat, knit a full repeat of the 2 rows, and then weigh it again, and you know exactly how much yarn you need to knit those 2 rows. And then when we get to start section 3, we'll go over how many rows, how many repeats of each section you're going to need to do to transition between the 2 colors. And I can help anyone with some math there to know how many more repeats we can still put into section 2 and still have enough yarn for section 3. If that is something you would like me to do, we can do that in the Facebook group, so we can do it a little bit more one-on-one with the numbers that you're using. Otherwise, if you're watching this later or you're not sure yet if you want to do some extra rows, we'll go over that in more detail again in section 3. So that is how we are doing section 2 here. I will see you guys all next week in the Wednesday update thread, and I will see you again for section 3 in 2 weeks. So happy knitting, and I will see you again in a while.